SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. Today's topic of today's lecture is Heritage Significance and Values, Part 1. Remember last time we talked about the debate about the heritage, that what should we preserve, why should we preserve, and how should it be preserved. And in that context, we also talked about the divergent approaches of conservation. Remember, we talked about two cases. One is the old city of Warsaw and another was the Coventry Cathedral of York. In both the cases, the structures were damaged due to the war. But in case of Warsaw, what they decided, they sort of rebuilt the entire city, whereas in case of Coventry Cathedral, the war ravaged structure was preserved as it is and they built a new structure. So, almost a similar situation, but the approaches they took were very different. And why it was a very different approach, the answer lies to that is the significance and value that was contributed to these structures, and that actually decided that what approach should be taken. So, the significance of a place should influence decision about its future, and that is why it is very important. For example, in case of old city of Warsaw, what is important, the historic fabric or the association? We saw that when it is declared as a World Heritage Site, they saw that the inner strength and determination of the nation, that intangible aspect is the value, and the process is the comprehensive reconstruction of the city is the process. Whereas in case of Coventry Cathedral, the quest for peace and reconciliation was the value, which is a symbolic value that attributed to the structure, and the preservation and the new construction is a process. So, what we saw in these two cases, almost similar situation, but the value and significance, they decided that whether it will be preserved, whether they will be reconstructed and how, and that is attributed, sometimes it is acquired, it gets on over the years, and sometimes how people interpret that. That is why there is an interrelationship. That is why it is very important to understand that what are the values and significance of a heritage site, structure or precinct. So, as I said that the value is important and the conservation should be seen not as a product, but as a process. So, conservation as a process should take account of all the values that contribute to its significance. So, what is important? First of all, what is important is to understand the values, and second is that assess the heritage significance of that particular cultural property, structure or site. Now, people may value a place or a site or a structure for many reasons beyond its utility or personal association. Just utility is probably not enough. Is actually that is not very important when we are talking about conservation. It is important, but it is not the only thing. So, let us see what are the different types of value. It can be for its distinctive architecture or landscape. It can be the story it can tell about its past, its connection with the notable people or events, its landform, flora and fauna, because they find it is beautiful or inspiring, for its role as a focus of the community, architectural or historic interest or scientific interest, or there can be special interest also. So, as we can see that there are different types of values and significance, and we must understand that what are these values in a particular context. Let us take one by one. For example, distinctive architecture or landscape. Some of the let us discuss some of the structures or examples. This is Mukteshwar temple, Bhubaneswar, Orissa, just built in 950 AD. It's a typical Odisha temple, a beautiful example of a Nagar style of architecture. It is not a very large structure, it's a very small structure, but why is important? It is important because it is an unique example of this particular style of architecture, and it was also marked as transition which that particular style was going through at that time, and that is why it is very important for architectural reason. If you talk about another example, Victoria Memorial Hall, Kolkata, entirely different architectural style built quite recently in 1906 and 1921. It is Indo-Saracenic revivalist style. It was built, it is a beautiful structure, it almost now has become an icon of Kolkata. It was built to commemorate Queen Victoria. It was Lord Curzon who actually took the initiative to build it, and it is important because it is for architecture. So, when you talk about architecture, it is not only how it looks, but its construction technology, how that huge structure was built, the structural system, is everything is very important when you talk about the architecture. Let us talk about another structure, Qutub Minar, Delhi, constructed during 1192 and 1220. It is an Iranian style. It is actually, the value may be symbolic or religious, but it is very important because of its structure, it is an architectural marvel. So, we have taken 3 different examples of 3 different architectural styles, and each one has a value because it is depicting a particular architecture pertaining to that period or pertaining to that style. It is an unique example of that. Let us talk about landscape. This is Chashma Shahi in Kashmir, Mughal garden, and which is important because the terrace garden, the fountains and the aqueduct, all of these contributed to the landscape value of this terrace garden. It is a beautiful site, beautiful landscape which is built for recreational purpose. Another example we can talk about, entirely different, Studley Royal in UK, which is an 18th century landscape water garden, a picturesque romantic style. Why these two are very unique in a particular context? Both are dealing with water in a different way, one is aqueduct, another is the thing. The Studley Royal is important because it is very unique. There no such sort of water garden existed that time. The style wise, the landscape feature wise, it is very unique, and similarly this terrace garden and when we are talking about the terrace garden, we must remember it is not only the terrace garden, the aqueducts, the different technology which was used that time, all of these contribute to the uniqueness of this landscape feature. So, this landscape again has some sort of a built up structure, man made structure, but they are important because predominantly for its landscape value. When we talk about landscape, there are other examples like Wayanad Lake in Kerala. It is very important, it is a tourist place, people from all over the world and different places come to there are a lot of resorts which are there. And also we can see an entirely different one, which is the Grand Canyon, USA, a geological formation, intricate and colorful landscape. These two examples, they are very different from the earlier example of landscape. They are also important for the landscape because these are natural formations, and whereas the other two examples were for the man-made landscape. So, even in landscape we can have a different types of landscape, but in these two examples of Grand Canyon and this lake in Kerala, we must understand there is something more value attached to it, that is ecological, because this also talks about not only the landscape feature, but also the community, the flora and fauna and other things. Let us talk about another one, which is the narration, that they also can be the heritage site which talks about or which tells us about something, the story it can tell about the past. For example, this looks like it is not a monumental building, it looks like an ordinary streetscape. What it is, where it is? It is actually Colonial Williamsburg in USA. It is a living history museum and private foundation presenting part of an historic district in the city of Williamsburg, Virginia, United States. it is not a living city, it is a museum. The entire city is a museum. It has been preserved the way it was, like that, with all the structures and the houses, the timber houses, that because it depicts or narrates a particular period of history, and that is why it has been preserved. This is one of the street in Colonial, a normal street, but how do we preserve such historic areas or city? It is not only enough to, because they are narrating a story or certain events or particular period, it is not enough to just preserve the fabric or the structure, but it is also important to narrate the story. So, when one goes to Williamsburg, there are a lot of events which take place. For example, this shows a recreated day in the life of a royal capital, which is meticulously recreating the crucial period of a particular colonial era, where the gunfighting, the fighting, battle scenes are being recreated, because it has to talk. It is the that fabric or the structures which have been preserved there, they become a stage set. They are authentic, they are preserved in an authentic way, but along with that it must also narrate that what it is all about. And to do that, the involvement of a lot of people are involved. So, as we can see that the local volunteers here, they are dressed up in the women reenacting the colonial. So, there are a lot of skills, craftsmen, tradesmen which are there. They also dress up like that, and they reenact the way it was. They used to dress, they used to take part in the different activities, and this is generally done by the local volunteers or the local stakeholders who sort of contribute to enacting all these aspects. So, this narration becomes a very important part, or why we should conserve. It also contributes one type of value. For this narrative history or narrating a particular period or time, a very interesting case is the Jorvik Viking Center in York, which is a living history museum. Let us see what it is. If you look at from outside, it is only a very normal structure from the outside at the street level, but it is actually a museum and a visitor attraction in York, Ulan in Yorkshire, containing lifelike mannequins and life-size dioramas depicting the Viking life in the city. It was created by the York Archaeological Trust in 1984. So, it is not an ordinary museum. What it is about? Actually, in York, as we can see that here under the, it's all happened underground in the basement, that there are mannequins. So, there are the entire village which has been recreated, and one can go in this type of small cars and move around in the villages, the seaside and other things, and they recreate the entire thing. Not only the smell, not only the sound, but the smell and everything is recreated. But is it an ordinary museum? No. What happened is that Yorkshire is basically a Roman city. The Romans came and built the city. So, wherever, and it is a living city, old historic core of the York, and wherever one does some sort of an excavation or builds a new structure, every day almost they excavate or find out or discover the Roman ruins. So, that's quite common. The archaeological trust come there, do the investigation, they decide whether it is important or not, and accordingly either they document and they allow the new structure to come, or otherwise they sort of, if it is very important, they preserve it. Now, at one point of time, it was known that before the Roman came there, the Viking also came and there and settled. Some of the names of the roads and the places show that the Vikings were there, but it was an important trading hub. But where was the evidence? There was no evidence there. So, at one point of time during 80s, what happened is that during 1976-81 in the Coppergate, which is they were doing some excavation for building a shopping center in the heart of the old city. While doing that excavation, they found out a different type, it is not the Roman ruins, they found out a different types of structures, it is almost thatched, round shaped and other things. And so, the archaeological trust came and they started seeing, investigating what happened, they have their own way of doing. So, all sort of detailed investigation was going on. And when the detailed investigation was going on, and after that they found out that actually there was a Viking village in that place. So, there was an actual evidence so far what was believed, and there is an evidence for that. Now, the question comes is that how sort of they should they preserve, because it is very important. They can take the photographs and put it in the museum and archive and allow the modern development to go. But while that excavation was going on, the local people showed a lot of interest, and they were standing there, as you can see, that they used to understand what is the thing, what is the discovery, what they found. So, there was a lot of interest was generated because of the Viking village and that particular site. So, they decided to do something. What they did? So, they converted that into a living history museum of the Viking based on the evidence, actual archaeological evidence which was found in that site. And that site, that location was very important to recreate the village. So, the village was recreated. Then it shows a lot of the remains and the discoveries, what they found from the site. And also in addition to that, what they do is that every year there is a Viking festival which goes on in New York almost for 15 days. There is a boat, the way they used to create the boat, they create the boat, they construct the boat, a lot of interest is created, tourists come, a lot of festival happens, there is a mock fight which is to happen, they dress up between the two things. So, it is really a very successful event. But in addition to that, the museum is there in the basement of that ordinary looking structure, and over that there is a shopping center which has come up. So, I think that is a very, very interesting example, that York big Viking center in New York, where continuity of the past and present has been established. So, we see that we are talking about the divergent approaches. What could have done? They could have done the investigation, they could have shifted that to some other museum somewhere, taken the photographs and kept it in the museum. But what is important is not only the evidence, but the site of the location is very important. At the same time, that huge site in a sort of a city which has a prime land of the old city, which is a commercial area, now also partly residential area. So, there to keep a huge space like that does not make any sense, economic sense. So, what they did is that they decided that the entire basement will be converted into a museum in actual site. In part of the museum they show actual excavation, how it was constructed, and over the site they sort of built. I think it is a very good example, and by not only the shopping center has come up, the Jorvik Viking Center, and this Viking Center has now become a tourist attraction of Yorkshire and generate a lot of economy for that. So, this is a very good example where the continuity of past and present can come up and can be built up on the actual evidence. And again we come back to the significance. What is the significance? Significance is the narration of a particular time, of a story, that who came there and settled for some time. Let us talk about another types of value and significance association. This is again a very, very ordinary looking house. It is you can see that if you can recognize that it is ordinary looking, but it is for a very important association with a very important person. It is actually Sabarmati Ashram, Ahmedabad, where a father of the nation, Gandhiji, stayed there and spent a very meaningful part of his life. So, this is the place, this structure, this house, which is actually very, very ordinary looking, but it has acquired a significance and value because of its association with a very, very important personality. And because it is important, because of its association, that value, then it is, that is why it is very important to keep not only the structure like as it is, but it is also very important to keep the interior of the structure, the way he used to stay, the furniture and everything. Sometimes they are just taken from the photograph, sometimes they are the authentic furniture, original furniture has been kept. So, the interior also very important because it is association with the person who stayed here. Also, we must understand that Sabarmati Ashram is not only important because Gandhiji stayed here, but it is also important because it played a very important part of the Indian independence movement, because a lot of activities and events happened here. So, on one hand it is association with a notable person, on the other hand it is association with the Indians freedom movement which happened here, and that is why this ordinary looking structure has acquired a value and a significance, because it narrates that story, narrates that events, narrates the association with that person, and that sort of goes on attributing to the combined values and significance, and that decide how it should be preserved. Let us talk about a similar other structure, which again is a very ordinary looking structure. It is located in West Bengal. It is also important for its association. Its association with a very noted author, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, who stayed there for a significant part of his life and composed a lot of his novels. That time the river was flowing very close to the house, this structure. Now it has shifted away, but this structure has been now declared as a heritage structure, and recently it has been sort of preserved, restored, and now as we are talking about that, it is because of the association value, it is important. It is very important to keep not only the outside of the structure, it is very important to keep the interior also, because it is important because he stayed there. So, his daily life, how he depicted there is very important. That is why the chairs, the study table, he practiced homeopathy, and each and everything is very important, and they are kept as it is the way he used to stay, because this structure is important because not only association his person, but it also narrates, or he also sort of talks about his association through all these sort of important furniture, the important elements, each and every room is actually shows that how this person, a very noted author who is very respected, how he used to stay there. So, this is association and connected with the notable people. These are the two examples, and also Sabarmati Ashram, we talked about the event of the independence movement. So, as we can see that some of his daily use items are kept there and preserved. Now, we have to also talk about the event. We talked about Sabarmati Ashram as association with the event of the lot of events of the Indian freedom movement. That does not mean always the event are always very when we sort of attribute a value and significance, this does not mean event are always sort of positive events. There can be events which are not so positive, but very important. For example, this one, this is Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. This is the place where huge number of Jews and other people were kept there. They were burnt alive in the gas chamber. From the children to the old people, ladies, they were brought here, and this has been preserved and kept as a living museum, again a museum, because of its association with a particular event of history. And there is a museum inside, it depicts, like you can see, the lot of shoes are there. It shows the people who were brought here and they were burnt alive in the gas chamber. So, their shoes have been kept there to show the enormity of the problem, that incident which take place here. There is also this structure which is a burnt structure, and it has been preserved like that. What it is? It actually is a structure which sort of exploded, and where the inmates who sort of smuggled in some bombs with the help of the local people and exploded that. So, it is and it has been preserved just like that, because it shows that the strength of the inmates who were really fighting every day, and how they sort of also had the courage to protest. So, it has been preserved for that. So, as I said that this association can be with the different types of events and different types of people to depict the different types of significance and the values. So, as we can see that, as we have seen in all this example, it can be for the values and significance can be for architecture, for landscape, for ecological reasons, for association with person, or can be with an event, and it can be significant or valuable because of the narration, as we have seen. And so, we have seen some of the aspects. Again, I am sort of summarizing. It can be for its distinctive architecture or landscape. The significance can be the story it can tell about the past. We have seen some of the examples. Its connection with the notable people or events, and the events which are not so important, and one can ask that why should we try to remember something which is brings sorrow in our mind. I remember that something is written in that camp that one must remember such events which are not happy events, so that such type of mistakes do not happen in future. That is why it is very important to sort of keep that, and the people should see that what type of things can happen if people do not go in the right way. So that we do not do the mistake like that in future. It is very important for that. So, in the next lecture we will talk about the landform, flora and fauna, the other types of significance and the values. We also will talk about the values can be because they find it beautiful and inspiring. They means the people and the community. For something preserved, because the value can be the role of the focus of a community, or it can be architectural or historic interest or scientific interest, and it can be of special interest also. So, in our next lecture we will talk about this type of examples and the values and significance.